Good evening, everyone. A week today, on the 6th of May, Scotland goes to the polls to elect the 129 members of the Scottish Parliament. These MSPs have responsibility for many important policy areas that affect our lives: health and social care, education, employment, economic development, the environment, housing, transport, and justice. As we know all too well, these are turbulent times. We've been living through the most serious national emergency since the Second World War, and the pandemic is far from over. Our economy and labour market have taken big hits, and recovery needs to get underway. We're still dealing with the impact of Brexit, and there is the question of whether there should be another referendum on Scottish independence. So there are crucial issues at stake in this election. Today, live from CamGlen Radio, we have three of the candidates standing for the Rutherglen Constituency who are here to explain why they should get your vote. The fourth candidate, Lynn Naylon, has unfortunately had to withdraw at very short notice because of a family emergency. We're delighted that Graham Simpson is standing in for her. My name is John Bachtler. I'm the chair of CamGlen Community Council, and it's my pleasure to welcome to CamGlen Radio in alphabetic order: Claire Hochy, standing for the Scottish National Party; James Kelly, standing for the Scottish Labour Party and Scottish Cooperative Party; Graham Simpson, as I said, standing in for the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party's candidate Lynn Naylon; and Sheila Thompson, standing for the Scottish Liberal Democrats. First of all, thank you to all four of you for joining us virtually at CamGlen Radio. It's going to be a different sort of hustings without being able to sit around the table or in front of an audience, but we hope that CamGlen's technology will enable us effectively to discuss the issues that matter in these elections. Now, before we go into the questions, I'm going to start by asking each of you to tell us in 2 minutes why we should elect you to be the member of the Scottish Parliament for the Rutherglen constituency. Again, proceeding in alphabetic order, first of all, Claire Hochy of the SNP. Claire, why should you be re-elected as constituency MSP for Rutherglen?
This Scottish Parliament election will be the most important since devolution. These serious times need serious leadership, and it's only the SNP that can offer this. After the election on Thursday, we need to continue remobilising our NHS at pace, improving and renewing services, increasing already record funding and staff recruitment. The SNP will create fast-track cancer diagnostic services in every health board area, establish 10 new elective treatment centres to specialise in procedures like hip and knee replacements, and we will increase funding for mental health services. We will ensure that children receive the best start in life by supporting their education. Hungry children can't learn. And if the SNP are re-elected, we will introduce free school meals for all primary pupils. We'll recruit 3,500 additional teachers and classroom assistants, and we will continue investing to close the attainment gap. And we'll kickstart our economy by supporting local businesses and creating jobs throughout Scotland. As we begin rebuilding from the pandemic, at stake is who will shape our country's future and determine the life chances of this and generations to come. Boris Johnson's Tories or Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. If we want to make sure that the country we rebuild is the one that we want it to be, then we must work to the right plan, the SNP's plan, with the priorities and interest of Scotland at its heart. After the 2008 financial crash, Westminster's idea of recovery was a damaging decade of austerity and welfare cuts. We can't go back to that. We need Nicola Sturgeon's safe, steady and experienced leadership to lead the country through and out of this crisis. And we will give the choice of a better, fairer, more progressive future with an independence referendum. Today, Nicola Sturgeon launched a plan for the first 100 days of the new Parliament. Our immediate priority must be recovery, and we've shown how we will do this. To re-elect me, a passionate local representative with a strong constituency record, vote Claire Hochy SNP on your constituency ballot. And to re-elect Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister to lead us through the COVID pandemic, vote SNP on your regional ballot. On May the 6th, make it both votes SNP.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. That was Claire Hockery of the Scottish National Party. Next up is James Kelly of Scottish Labour. James, the same question to you. Why should you be elected as the constituency MSP?
Thank you, John, and can I thank CamGlen Radio for the opportunity to participate in tonight's hustings. It is a very unusual campaign, but it is great that we've got the opportunity to debate the ideas that are at the centre of the election. The SNP have made their central political demand in this election that there be another independence referendum. But more than ever, as the country recovers from the COVID pandemic, the biggest health emergency in all of our lifetimes, we need the country to come together, and we need the next Parliament to come together. That's what local people want. That's what local people need. So if you're in Drumsagard and you're a family and you're worried about whether your children are going to emerge from school to have jobs, or whether their education is going to be affected by the aftermath of the pandemic, you want plans to deal with that. If you stay in Spittal and you need a hip replacement and you've been left on an NHS waiting list, you need assurance that that's going to be taken forward. If you're in Cambuslang and your business has had to close partially because of the pandemic, you need to know how that will be rescued. And if you're in Coatshill and Blantyre and you're worried about the cuts that have affected the leisure centre there, you want an end to the SNP cuts. So a vote for Scottish Labour in this election is a vote to bring the country together. We need a COVID recovery plan that supports jobs, that prioritises the NHS and deals with people languishing on NHS waiting lists. We need to ensure that people have the best chance in education to make the most of themselves and to gain the benefit from the education in our local schools. If you want to bring the country together to prioritise recovery and not a referendum, vote for myself as a Scottish Labour candidate on May the 6th and use both votes for Scottish Labour in this crucial election.
Okay, thank you very much, James. That was James Kelly of the Scottish Labour Party. Next up is Graham Simpson of the Scottish Conservatives. Graham, what's the case for a Scottish Conservative to be the constituency MSP for Rutherglen?
Well, thanks very much, John. Obviously, I'm quite a late replacement for Lynn Naylon, who sent her apologies. I'm not quite sure what the issue has been with Lynn, but I'm pleased to be here because I've had quite a lot of dealings over the years with the community council in Cambuslang and Rutherglen when I was a councillor up in East Kilbride. So I'm very, very close to the area. I know the area well, but I'm clearly not seeking your votes. You can't vote for me. I'm asking you to vote for Lynn Naylon and the Scottish Conservatives on a very lengthy regional ballot paper, 60 centimetres long, in fact, I learned earlier. A lot of parties on that ballot paper. I think this election has largely focused on independence, and I find that a real concern given the year and a bit that we've been through. We should be focusing in this next 5 years on recovering from the pandemic. We shouldn't be distracted by any talk of splitting this country apart. And by that I mean splitting Scotland apart, frankly, because those of us who went through the last independence referendum know how painful that was. We cannot afford more division. We need to focus on recovery, rebuilding the economy, investing in the health service, and restoring standards in education which have slipped. And Claire talked about the attainment gap. That attainment gap has hardly budged in 14 years. Nicola Sturgeon said she would make it her priority. Well, you know, the recent report from Audit Scotland shows if that's her priority, we should be very, very concerned. So I'm asking you to vote, both votes Scottish Conservative next week.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham. That was Graham Simpson of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. And last, but certainly not least, Sheila Thompson of the Scottish Lib Dems. Sheila, why should you be the constituency MSP? Sorry, you're muted, Sheila.
Good evening, and thank you again for the invite tonight. Why should I be your local MSP? Because I think the area needs a Liberal Democrat MSP. Liberal Democrats will put recovery first and foremost. We really need to see recovery coming after the period that we've just been through, not just from COVID, but the effects that we're feeling from Brexit. And it's time to make sure that we work on the things that are important to the people within the community here in Rutherglen and Cambuslang. We need to make sure that we take the action that the constituents want us to take and that we've been listening to them. We need to make sure that our education system is fit for the children of today and not the way it's being messed up over the last few years when under the SNP government, even though it's meant to have been their top priority. Imagine if it becomes second to that of a second referendum, then where will our education system be? So we want to make sure that our children don't miss out on the education that they're entitled to and that they're able to catch up on what they've lost during the pandemic. We also need to see improvement in our health service, particularly in our mental health service. We haven't seen any increase in the amount of staff in training at the moment in mental health. It's the same number of people training as it was 5 years ago, and we need to see that improving. We need to make sure that the money going into mental health is actually getting to the people that need it and making sure it's available to all at the right community level, something that I'm particularly passionate about through my own work and working for a charity. We need to make sure that we're looking after the economy. We just need to go down any of the main streets within the constituency to see empty shops and to see more and more people around during the day because they don't have employment to go to. We need to make sure that people have access to training, and we believe that we can do that through a training bond. And we want to make sure that people learn the new skills to fit jobs that can become available to them, especially if we become a much more greener economy and look at what jobs would be available in the green economy. If you want to make sure that we focus on what's important to the community, please vote myself on the first ballot and Liberal Democrats on the second ballot next week. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheila. That was Sheila Thompson of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Well, those introductory statements have already given us an idea of the key themes that are running through the manifestos and the political debate in this election. Independence, the recovery, public services, the environment, communities. And let's now explore these issues in more detail. What I'll do in going through these themes is include some questions that have been sent in by CamGlen listeners to the CamGlen Facebook page, and we'll try to give them some airtime as we go forward. But let's start with a topic of the independence referendum and the constitutional makeup of the UK, where I think it's fair to say from those introductions that there are more significant differences between the parties than any other issues. Claire Hockey, would you like to start off by developing your position and the justification for a second referendum?
Thanks, John. Thanks very much, and thanks to whoever it was that sent in that question. Scotland has the absolute right to choose its own future, to have better democracy, to have better government, to have the government that we have voted for, to guarantee a free public NHS. That's not something that we can rely on Westminster to provide for us. You only have to look south of the border to see how the Tory government have salami sliced the NHS and privatised it. To develop a fairer social security system, we've already developed that in Scotland with the limited powers that we have, but to expand that so that people don't have to present to the DWP year on year, having to go through numerous assessments to prove exactly what their medical staff or their consultant staff have told the DWP about and their conditions that they're suffering from. to escape from Brexit, that's not what Scotland voted for. Scotland voted very firmly to remain in Europe. We were told at the last referendum, if you vote not for independence, but you vote to remain in the UK, we will remain in the EU. You told us, lead us, not leave us. And instead, rules and laws that we have passed in our parliament unanimously are going to be challenged by the UK government. Those are laws that we are looking to use to protect our children's rights, their human rights. And yet the Tory government in Westminster wants to take us to court to try and challenge that. We need to make our own future, and the only way that we can do that to guarantee we have the Scotland, the fairer, more equal Scotland that we want, is to be independent.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Graham, you made quite clear in your introduction that you are opposing a second referendum on independence. Do you want to answer some of the points that Claire made?
Well, my view is we had a vote in 2014. There was a clear decision for Scotland to remain as part of the UK. So, you know, and we were told it was to be once in a generation. Well, a generation has certainly not passed. And given, as I said earlier, the period we've just been through, and in fact, we're still in the pandemic, although things are improving, I think we need to focus entirely the next 5 years on recovering, not just in Scotland, across the UK, actually, probably across the world, if we're being honest. And the last thing we need is to be going into a referendum, and referendums, as we've seen, whether it's on Scottish independence, whether it's on Europe, they are divisive. And even though Europe, that referendum delivered the result that I personally wanted, but you can see how difficult things have been since in negotiating, getting ourselves out of the EU. Just imagine how difficult it would be for Scotland to get itself out of the UK. So I think it's the last thing we need. I mean, Claire speaks about the NHS. The NHS is under the complete control of the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government. I don't even know why she's mentioning it. Social Security, a whole suite of powers have come to Scotland, and the SNP have handed some of them back. They can't deal with them, so they've said to the UK government, you deal with that. So if they're saying that on Social Security, just imagine the problems that they would face if we have to leave the UK. And frankly, if we're going to make one final point, and it relates to the pandemic, just look at how we've managed to deal with things as part of the UK. The rollout of the vaccination programme, world leading, and that's thanks to the broad shoulders of the UK, and all governments in the UK have managed to work together, and that's the way it should be.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Sheila, perhaps you'd like to come in here because I think you're also opposed to independence and a second referendum, but you don't see the constitutional arrangements as static.
No, I think I'm definitely for Scotland within the United Kingdom, but I think we need to look at how the United Kingdom works and how we work together across regions of England and Scotland and Wales together to give more equal power around the different areas, but coming together for things that are important like defence. But at the moment, I think it's just totally the wrong time for another referendum. Again, we haven't had the generation since the last one, but more importantly, at this moment in time, the country is in such a difficult position coming out of the COVID situation that we need to get back to sorting our children's education, to getting our economic policies back in place before we look to any further changes in what we're doing. And I think we also have to remember the importance of our local authorities there as well, and our communities that we're in. One of the issues that I have with the SNP government is the centralisation of everything there and the less powers that our councils have. And if we were to become an independent country, then we're narrowing that down even further. I think we start with community first, to our local authorities, to Scottish Government, to UK and to Europe. You know, I'm definitely someone that counts myself as Scottish, British and European. And even if we're out of the EU, I still see myself in that situation. So I don't think we can cope. And a lot of people, that even those that had voted for independence before, are realising, one, this is not the right time. And two, the economy has changed so much. And the last time we've spoken about the economy and relying on the oil and gas sector to be able to fund independence. It wasn't there then, and it's certainly not there now. So this is not the right time to go towards another referendum. And I don't think it would give us the right results for the people in Rutherglen and Cambuslang and round the area.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. James, Scottish Labour seems to be somewhere between the views that we've heard expressed. Now is not the time, but possibly after 5 years. Is that fair? Where does Scottish Labour stand? Where do you stand? Sorry, James, you're on mute.
Sorry, it's the phrase of the year. You're on mute. Let me deal with the question in two parts. You know, people will often say to me, you know, but why don't you support independence? And as somebody that really cares about the local area, I look at independence in terms of how it would impact on the local area. Simple facts of the matter are that in Scotland we spend 15 billion more than we take in taxes. So if Scotland were to be an independent country, the first thing in a Scottish budget that would need to be decided as, are you going to put up taxes or are you going to make cuts? So that would mean people paying more in the local area, or some of our local facilities being closed and potentially resources taken out of our schools. That's a prospect I just can't countenance. So I'm totally opposed to independence. In terms of another independence referendum, look, we've just come through a pandemic and we're still emerging from it. It's been tremendously difficult for everybody. And I think what the next Parliament needs to do is it needs to focus on coming together. We need to be united. If we embark on another referendum, it's going to be tremendously confrontational, even more divisive than the last one. And we would then be letting down the families, the pensioners, the businesses in this local area. So it's the last thing we need. So to answer your question, I don't support independence and I don't support another independence referendum.
Okay, thanks very much, James. Graham, you wanted to come back in there?
Yeah, James mentions people working together, and I've seen in my short time in the Scottish Parliament that parties can work together when they try. We've done it on a number of bills. So I think, I really do feel strongly that the next 5 years should be about people working together as much as possible across the political divide. And inevitably, if you introduce a referendum, that won't happen. So we need to be laser focused on getting recovery, and parties. If you look at manifestos, a lot of the ideas that are quite similar, apart from on the Constitution. So I think if we park that and we all focus on recovery, you know, frankly, I think that's what the people expect.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. Could I just follow up there, though? Because something that we've heard quite a lot about is there are arguments, as you've outlined, against having an independence referendum. But if the majority of people vote for it, isn't there not a sort of democratic case to answer?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, we had a referendum in 2014. That's a very short time ago. So, you know, you have to decide how often are you going to have these votes? Surely, if you have a vote, it should stand for a period of time. And we were told once in a generation. You know, I don't know what Claire thinks is a generation, but I certainly think it's longer than just a few years ago. So I think, you know, if you're going to have a referendum, that result has to stand for a period. and it's certainly now is definitely not the right time.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Claire?
Thanks, Graham. If you look at the definition of what a generation is in the Northern Ireland Agreement that your party signed up to, that's 7 years, and certainly this is a phrase that is often flung anytime anyone wants to raise a referendum. The situation has changed hugely. We were promised we would stay in Europe. That's not happened. We've been dragged out of Europe against our will. And I hear from all the parties here about how we're too wee, we're too poor, we can't afford it. There are examples right throughout Europe of countries that are smaller, that have population sizes the same as Scotland, who have much less natural resources than we do, much less natural wealth than we do. And they are happier, healthier and wealthier nations. So there are examples there of how we can thrive, and we will thrive as an independent country. I'm not suggesting that we have a referendum tomorrow. SNP is not suggesting we have a referendum tomorrow. What we're saying is once the COVID crisis is over, then we should go to the people and ask them what they want. And if there is an independence majority in this next parliament, then if you continue to refuse that, Westminster continues to refuse that, that's a democratic deficit. How can you deny the democratic will of the people of Scotland?
Okay. Thank you, Claire. Something that's been raised with us is very much the point that you raised when the pandemic ends. Now we've seen forecasts that go up to 2025 in terms of the economic impact legacy of the pandemic. What do you think? Could you clarify what that means? The pandemic ends.
So when we get through this initial crisis of the pandemic, we know that in the years to come there will be, or it's forecast that there will be economic consequences of this. But we certainly believe that the best way to recover from the economic consequences of COVID is through an independent Scotland. We're already seeing the Tories lining up another round of austerity. They're looking at cuts in Whitehall. They're looking at ways that they can cut public spending. We've seen what austerity has done. We've seen the choices that they've made in the past. We're stuck with a Tory government till goodness knows when. We need to ensure that Scotland has a fairer and a more economically prosperous recovery than what the Tories in Westminster and Labour enabling them there would give us.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Sheila, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I mean, if we're looking and trying to take Claire's point and take it a stage further, I understand that she's speaking about an independent Scotland that's going to be back in Europe. And certainly when you're comparing this to other smaller countries, you're speaking about countries that are in Europe. Scotland getting back into Europe is not an automatic thing, and it's not going to happen the day that we become independent from the rest of the United Kingdom. And so, we're going to go through a number of transitions, and there have been SNP people that have already said that the first few years after an independence will be economically difficult. So you've got to put that on top of an economically difficult period that we're going to come through, and it's going to be the last bit, if you like, of the pandemic recovery from COVID. So you could say we're going to still be economically challenged from COVID, and then we're going to have an independence referendum. The referendum itself challenges the economy as people get scared to take action, not knowing which way it's going to go. And then we're going to be independent but out of Europe and have to cope with that, and then try and work our way back in. There's no automatic right to get into Europe. Are we going to have two different currencies? Are we going to have a Scottish currency for a period before we then go to the euro? Because any country going into the euro, Europe will have to go to the euro.
Okay. Sheila, thanks for that. I mean, in your manifesto, you've proposed a constitutional convention to rebalance the constitutional arrangements in the UK. And we've had questions, including one from a listener, Robert Cumberland, who's concerned about the sighting of nuclear weapons in Scotland and the lack of influence that Scotland has. How do you see, short of independence, the asymmetries of size and power across the UK being resolved, and the dominance of England?
Well, that comes through federalism. That comes from regional governments in other parts of the United Kingdom, and then working together for the things that are UK and have to stay within the UK, such as defence. But if everyone is working in the same way and has equality across the levels of government, then we will all feel much better. We'll still make different decisions. Scotland will still have things that are its priorities compared to Cornwall, Devon area of England. And we need to take that into account, because that goes with what sort of economy we've got, what sort of businesses we've got there, and how, you know, the makeup of our community, the size of elderly population, and what's important that we provide to those. And through having regional government stroke Scottish government for the country of Scotland and for Wales, and having that across the rest of the country, then we can come together for the bigger things that we need to work together and have a fairer system, so that we have that level of autonomous government without being independent for each area, but coming together to share in the things that we need to do.
Okay, thanks, Sheila. James, you'd like to come in?
Thanks, John. Well, let me take it back to the local area. We're all seeking to be elected to be the MSP to represent the local area. So if you take a walk or a drive through the constituency, look at the number of boarded up shops. It's not just the shops that are closed, it's the people who work within them who are on furlough. The Rutherglen and Hamilton West Westminster constituency is one of the highest in terms of people who are on the furlough scheme. You know, speak to parents who are worried about their child's education being disrupted. Speak to people who are still waiting for NHS operations. These are all the issues that need to be addressed. And to do that, we need to actually bring out the best in the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Parliament is at its best when the parties work together and they try and do their best for people. And I think if we fire starting gun at the start of the next Parliament in a couple of weeks' time, looking at an independence referendum, everybody will be at loggerheads and will let down the people that were actually there to try and represent. So let's try and remember what the local people are looking for. And certainly people I've been speaking to in this area are very clear that they don't want another independence referendum.
Okay. I agree.
Thanks, James. Claire, we've got a consensus there, I think, that now is not the time, from the other three speakers. What's your
response? Please, this election is not an independence referendum. This election is about giving the people of Scotland the right to choose their future, the right to choose their recovery in the longer term from this pandemic that has wrecked the world essentially over the last 12 months. So I think we need to remember that. We will have the arguments about independence and about what that would mean for people further on, but this is about people actually having the democratic right to decide their future. And you cannot continue to deny people that democratic right. And, you know, I absolutely get what James and Sheila and Graham are saying about we need to ensure that it's an economic recovery as well, and that the Scottish Government and the SNP, if they're re-elected, will be absolutely focused on that as well. So ensuring that we have a good economic recovery and allowing people to make a decision about the world and the country that they want to live in are not mutually exclusive.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. I think that discussion leads us on to another important question then to explore in a bit more detail, which is the economic recovery of Scotland from the COVID crisis. We've heard already some of you have, all of you indeed have discussed some aspects of the recovery. But it would be good to hear more about how you see that being done. And James, perhaps you could lead off. What's your plan to rebuild Scotland?
Okay, thank you, John. I think that's a really important question. I mean, the pandemic's had a devastating effect on communities across Scotland, and Rutherglen, Cambuslang, Halfway and Blantyre hasn't been exempted from that. So, as I said earlier, I think the priority needs to be a jobs recovery. And I think there needs to be another number of aspects to that. What I find very concerning is that not only are we going to be in a position where people will potentially lose their jobs, but those leaving school, college and university are not going to be able to find any employment. So I think we need to prioritise a jobs guarantee, which Labour has set out in its manifesto for under 25s and also for over 25s, people who are long-term unemployed. I think allied to that, we are seeking to prioritise building up people's skills in order that they can seek employment, and they would have a £500 grant to spend on building up their skills. And I think the other thing that is crucial is ensuring that people have adequate work experience, so that should be built in to the schools programme. Allied to that, we need to promote the economy, promote our high streets, and on that Labour have set out a plan for give everyone a £75 card to spend in non-food retail. So in summary, what we would seek to do is promote jobs recovery, prioritise training and skills, and also help promote high streets and main streets by injecting cash into these local businesses, and that would help create and sustain jobs.
Thanks very much, James. Sheila, what's the Scottish Lib Dems plan for rebuilding Scotland?
Well, it has to be by working with our communities and then looking at what people have been asking us for. And that's definitely around the importance of education and making sure that we've got a bounce back plan to give extra support for every child and to be able to guarantee a job for teachers that are coming out of their training, because we need more teachers in our schools, and at the moment they don't always get jobs, and yet we know we have the need for those teachers. We need to be able to make sure that we've got the training right for those that are at college, and having opportunity for more apprenticeships and making sure that people get the opportunity, whether they're young or older, for retraining. You know, it's really important that as we go forward, that those that education are going to be affected by COVID do have the right training and opportunities to go in to education. But I was speaking on the doors just last night with, and I'm going to call her a mum, but she was a mum of somebody that was in their late 40s. So not the mum of a child, who was saying, you know, her son has lost his job, his style of job's no longer there, and the need for retraining at every age is really important. And it's important, particularly here in the constituency, when we're hearing it fresh on the doorsteps. We need to make sure in our health that we're empowering our GPs and health professionals to, in the community, to refer people for tests when they need them. We all know that there's people that haven't got tests as quickly as would normally have happened because of COVID, but we need to make sure that we're building into that the opportunity for people to get that. And we know that we've got an increased mental health issues. We've had mental health issues before, often hidden, but they really are coming to the fore with the COVID, with the restrictions of people feeling locked in their house, feeling isolated, and find people that find it hard to go back out. You know, as we've opened up this week, not everyone will have done anything different from last week, because there's a lot of people that are not able to do that because of the effect of it. And we need to make sure that we've got the right amount of counsellors there. And that's something that we really would want to focus on, is getting more people trained as counsellors, and by giving them a £5,000 grant to help them to take up the job and to be able then to support people. Listening to people and having listening skills that are trained within counselling can be used in all sorts of ways within our community to not only help those that have mental health problems just now, but to try and stop other people from going too far down that line and picking up early before, particularly our young people, need to go as far as things like the CAMS programme. And we need, in our economy, we need to make sure that we're supporting people as they come through and out of furlough. Because, you know, a lot of people that are in furlough at the moment, and we've already heard how high it is here in this area, we need to make sure that there's jobs for them to come out of, because not everyone that's furloughed is going to get back to work, and we are going to see an increase in our unemployment. So we need to make sure that there's big investment in new green businesses For example, insulation for buildings is ready to go. It just needs government commitment. Renewable and hydrogen will need us to get colleges to focus on new training and skills opportunities, which again go back to jobs. So if we get the economy going in the right way through using the green economy, we've opportunity to create new training and new jobs as well. So it hits on all these things.
Okay, thanks very much, Sheila. Graham, how do you see the rebuilding of Scotland's economy?
Well, this has to be the priority, as I've said earlier. But there's quite a lot of things you can do. Been touched on already. Skills, really important. I think we need to look at the young people who've really been affected by the pandemic, not just school leavers, but also youngsters who've left university. Often they've been left high and dry because of the pandemic. Very few opportunities. We need to see what their requirements are. So we need to invest in skills and apprenticeships. I'm quite keen, as I said earlier, on people working together, but on a local level. So I think that, places like Cambuslang could be developing their own local recovery plans. I've suggested the same for East Kilbride, which is where I'm standing, because everywhere is different. And I know there's a real sense of community where you are, John, so and skills as well. People with the ability to do that. So I'd just, I'd be urging whoever is elected in the constituency to, maybe lead on that and work with the council as well. We've suggested that every part of Scotland should have an economic development agency, which would work with councils. And I think also another idea we've had is, and this is a benefit which probably none of the other speakers like. One of the benefits of leaving the EU is that you can do better on procurement and have more local procurement. So I'd like to see more contracts awarded to local companies and Scottish companies. And also I think we need to invest more in infrastructure. And you don't have to look very far to see how poor the infrastructure is, in your area, indeed mine, just up the road. So investment in all these areas and housing as well. Some of the state of the housing stock is pretty poor in large parts of the country. Certainly in South Lanarkshire, it is. We need to do better there.
Thank you very much, Graham. And Claire, same question to you.
Thanks, John. I think, I can't remember if it was Graham or James had said that often in the Scottish Parliament, much as we disagree on lots of issues, particularly constitutional issues, there's lots of things we do agree on. And there's lots of similarities across all of the parties' manifestos in terms of focusing on recovery, improving outcomes for young people, and building on the businesses that we have across Scotland, but locally here too. So some of the things that the SNP would pursue are the Young Person's Guarantee, so that every 16 to 24-year-old will go to higher education, further education, an apprenticeship, a job, training, work experience, or formal volunteering programme to give them a positive destination. And we would appoint a minister specifically tasked with supporting youth employment and invest £45 million through local partnerships to provide training and employment recruitment incentives, which I think would benefit our local area. Fund colleges to deliver around 5,000 more short industry-focused courses and roll out in schools school coordinators to support young people access education, work or training. But looking at our own local economy, I was passing through Cambuslang yesterday, going up to the opening of the new banking hub there, which is most welcome for the local community, and saw the Scotland Loves local banners in Cambuslang Main Street. And again, we would launch a £10 million programme through that Scotland Loves Local programme to support local businesses. And we're also launching a £25 million fund for tourism. Now, people might look at you very strangely talking about tourism in the Rutherglen constituency, but it's one of my local priorities is to ensure that we do attract people to come to our area for the day or for longer. The David Livingstone Centre is about to reopen a fantastic facility for Blantyre. We have Cunningar Loop, an amazing urban park, one of the largest in Europe, where we have people travelling from all over Scotland to come to that in the times when they can travel. There are many attractions within Rutherglen, Cambuslang, Halfway and Blantyre that we would want people to come to, but will also generate local jobs and local wealth. And we want to create a local wealth fund and pilot local loyalty schemes to keep the money in our communities here. And by promoting and supporting communities to become 20-minute neighbourhoods, we will then encourage people to spend money locally. And we know that money spent with local small businesses stays within the communities. So those things are really important, as well as the bigger national infrastructure and investment and skills and training programmes.
Okay. Thanks very much, Claire. James, you wanted to come back, and then Sheila.
Thank you. I think there's some consensus across the answers that are given in terms of prioritising jobs and recovery. And a number of speakers made the point about the importance of education, and I agree with that. I think one of the things I would say is that if we're going to do that, it's absolutely crucial that we support local councils and that we stop the cuts. So over the last 8 years, there's been £937 million of cuts to council budgets throughout Scotland. And there needs to be an end to that, needs to be reversed if we're going to have a proper recovery. Because if we're going to have investment in schools and the proper IT and an adequate number of teachers, then that feeds through to skills, it feeds through to giving kids a chance, it feeds through to providing employers with people that are adequately qualified. So the plea I would make is that we need to stop the cuts if we're serious about prioritising jobs recovery.
Okay, thank you, James. Sheila?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the point that Claire was making about the Youth Employment Minister. Why, if it's so important now, and I do believe it is, it hasn't been done before, and why you spoke there about positive destination as if it was something new. It's something you've been trying to do for a long time and have been failing to do. There are so many young people in this area and across Scotland that have failed to get a positive destination while there's been an SNP government, partly because the education system hasn't given them enough and been prioritised enough to give them the right, not so much qualifications, but the actual knowledge to be able to move forward into employment and into training. And, you know, positive destination is really important. We also have to give some young people a choice of what that positive destination is and not just shoehorn them into a system to tick a box. But I can think of one young person in the constituency from the Cambuslang area who is so far from a positive destination, partly through mental health, through problems with family issues, lack of attending school, long before her positive destination opportunity should have been there. And we've got to make sure that that's working right. And James is right, that comes with proper council funding. It comes with the staff in the local areas knowing what they're doing and not pooling and centralising education to the middle and making sure that we're doing things locally.
Okay, thanks, Sheila. Claire, did you want to respond to?
Yeah, I did. And I know that positive destinations are not something new, and well over 90% of our school leavers go on to positive destinations, Sheila, currently. Now, James raises the issue there of council budgets. So in the 2021-22, despite the exceptional circumstances that we were in, the budget was delivered we delivered the local government settlement of £11.6 billion, and that will continue to provide local government with a funding settlement that's both fair and affordable. And if I remember correctly, Scottish Labour voted it through in the Scottish Parliament. They voted for the local government funding settlement. The South Lanarkshire Council received a 625.8 million in revenue funding in this year's budget, and that's an increase of 2.5%. Now, you know, if Scottish Labour are serious about local government funding and budgets, perhaps they should participate more in the negotiations. They seem to have been absent from South Lanarkshire Council's budget negotiations over recent years, and they've certainly been absent in the Scottish Parliament when budgets have been being discussed, unlike other parties who have been much more cooperative and much more willing to engage.
Okay. Thanks, Claire. Graham and then James.
Yeah, well, I certainly wasn't absent when I was a councillor in South Lanarkshire for 10 years, and every one of those 10 years we had to deal with budget cuts, mostly under the SNP. And every council has been the same in Scotland. So despite Claire's protestations, council budgets have been slashed under the SNP. That's the reality. Every single year, every council has to make cuts. Because the SNP have just not prioritised councils, and it's coming home to roost, because who's having to do the heavy lifting now during the pandemic? It's councils. We're seeing the value of them. Some of us knew the value anyway. They need to get proper funding, and we would actually enshrine that in law, because it's come to the point where we're going to have to do that to actually set a figure that councils should have a percentage of the Scottish budget. We haven't said what that should be, but we need to protect councils. They're not protected. Every single year they're being made to suffer, and that's why you see services eroded in your area and in my area. Yeah, not just in South Lanarkshire, every single council in Scotland.
Okay, thank you, Graham. James?
Yeah, just briefly, I think what this constituency needs and our constituency needs in South Lanarkshire is they need MSPs that are going to stand up for the area. You know, over the last 8 years, year after year, I've watched Glasgow SNP MSPs and South Lanarkshire SNP MSPs vote through budgets which mean cuts to their local areas. And in doing that, they're letting down the people that have been sent there to represent them. You know, that's simply not good enough. And I think we need a change. I think we need properly funded council budgets, and we need MSPs that are going to stand up and argue for that in the Scottish Parliament.
Okay. Thanks, James. Sheila?
Yeah, and it's not just about the funding coming straight from the Scottish Parliament. You know, the SNP have been saying for years that they were going to review the council tax and the system of local community tax. We haven't seen anything move forward on that either. And then whether we like the tax that's there or not, whether we want it to go up or down, with so many years it's been taken away the right for local authorities to be able to decide what they're doing with that as part of the pressure of what they'll get from Scottish Government. You'll only get this from us if you don't do this, put up your council tax, taking away the authority of the local council and the elected rights of the councillors to make those decisions for their own communities. You know, the SNP don't want the UK government telling them what they can and can't do, but they try and do the same to our local councils.
Okay, Claire, final word on this topic.
Thank you. Do you know, I'm surprised at Graham Simpson complaining about budgets when we look at the cuts that have been made to the Scottish Government's budget. We have to operate within a financial envelope, and we have distributed a fair settlement with local government over many years, and particularly over this year, when we compensated local government for the loss of income to the tune of £200 million for the loss of income from leisure centres, parking fees, etc., and certainly supported local government in their sterling efforts to support our communities throughout the pandemic. I mean, I think we should all be applauding South Lanarkshire Council for the efforts that they and their staff did in helping to support our communities through the very, very difficult year. They received £36.332 million to respond to the COVID pandemic and to ensure that our communities were cared for and looked after. So I refute what you're saying there about local government spending. But as I say, you know, Scottish Government has had budget negotiations certainly in the 5 years that I've been in Parliament, and there had been very little engagement from many of the opposition parties, particularly Scottish Labour, in terms of trying to engage with Scottish Government about what their asks are, what their wants are. So you can't then complain that you don't get what you really wanted if you don't come to the party and negotiate. Okay.
Thanks very much for your contributions on those economic questions. I'd like to extend the discussion a bit on economic development and link it to the issues of the response to climate change. I was struck in looking through the manifestos that all of them have proposals for investment in transport, which is of course important, yet transport is also the leading sector for carbon emissions. It'd be interesting to hear your proposals for transport investment and how you reconcile that investment with the need for the sector to contribute to the Scottish net zero targets. And just as a reminder for listeners, I think I'm right in saying that the commitment made by the Scottish Government is to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030 and net zero by 2045. I mean, if you think that there should be a different target or timescale, please do say. But let's just focus about how we reconcile some of these challenging issues, particularly between transport and emissions. Sheila, would you like to lead off?
Yes, we will improve public transport so that you always have an option not to use the car. Transport, along with heat, is the area where least progress has been made in decarbonisation, as you've already said. And we need to create regional transport partnerships able to integrate transport locally, giving them new powers to control bus services in their area, ending, if you like, Thatcher's deregulation that we're still suffering from. And you can't integrate local transport from a desk in Edinburgh. We need to reopen railway lines and move away from fossil fuels on the network, give public confidence in electric vehicles with a network of well-maintained and rapid chargers. And we need to support active travel, making it easier to make safe journeys by bike and or on foot. You know, we're still seeing the SNP supporting Heathrow expansion. It's likely that they've never heard of the climate change when you hear that, when they still want that. And we're seeing the Green Party, which I know are not here tonight, but they want to spend 22 billion on railways, starting with a tunnel under the Forth. If any other party had proposed pouring 4.8 million tonnes of concrete into the Forth, the Greens would have had a big fuss about it. And often the SNP are relying on the Greens within the Parliament. So I think it is important that we note that. So we need to get back to how people get around their own local area. And it needs to be affordable as well, so that people choose to get off of it and use the bus and the train, but making sure that they are using new power that, you know, there are hydrogen buses around. And we can make more of those. First Bus use them, but we don't see that many of them here. But, you know, certainly if you go home to my hometown of Aberdeen, you'll see a lot more buses there that are on hydrogen rather than the fossil fuels that we have here. So we need to make sure that we're moving that forward and making sure that that transport's more accessible to people to use, but with the right fuel behind it.
Okay, thanks, Sheila. James, would you like to come in on this?
Yeah. I think it's a really good question. So, first of all, you know, why is public transport important, and why should there be more investment in public transport? I think the reality is a lot of people in the Rutherglen, Cambuslang and Blantyre don't have cars, so they rely on public transport. And the bus network currently, you know, isn't adequate in places. So, for example, I was talking to a constituent in Bankhead who was explaining they need to get 2 buses in order to get to either the Queen Elizabeth or the Victoria for hospital appointments. And often after 6:30 at night, some of the services are taken off. So there needs to be more of a prioritisation to build, greater bus services. I think in terms of ScotRail, Abellio have taken hundreds of millions of pounds out of Scottish Government budgets, and the public have been badly served by the train service. And I think we should move towards a publicly owned model and also a mutual model that puts passengers before profits. So transport's important, and it serves the purpose of getting existing car users off the cars and into the transport network, and also be promoting, the use of bicycles as well. Finally, I think it's got to tie into the overall climate change policy. I think we have a fantastic opportunity with COP26 coming up, and we need to tie that to the promotion of energy efficiency and tackling fuel poverty, something that Rutherglen and CamGlen Housing Association has been really good at, using our natural environment and making sure the Scottish Government procurement policies, which sum £11 billion, have climate targets at the centre of that. So there's a number of things. Transport's important, but there's a number of things that are linked into that to move us towards these net zero emissions.
Okay, thanks very much, James. Claire, how do you resolve the dilemma of transport investment but meeting climate change targets?
Sure. Well, SNP have committed to bringing ScotRail back into public hands as part of a transition to a publicly owned, cleaner, greener railway, decarbonising the railway. We're going to resume low emission zones. We've committed to providing free bikes to children who cannot afford them, so that they are more able to participate in active travel. We're going to remove fossil fuel buses by 2023. And we're increasing the active travel budget to 10% of the transport capital budget on walking, cycling and wheeling. And I think those are really important steps to reducing our carbon footprint and to reducing greenhouse gases. We're also extending free bus travel to everyone under 22, which will help not only make the less car journeys, but will also assist our younger people who are perhaps struggling to access work, to access college, because of the burden of the cost of public transport. We're going to appoint a new Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero Energy and Transport, so that those are all joined up, and appoint a Minister for Just Transition, because we have to transition from a carbon-based heating and power source economy and move towards a greener, more planetary friendly way of fueling our houses, of running our vehicles, as Sheila said, and also our industry. So that there are lots of exciting things coming if there is an SNP government re-elected. And I think it's worth remembering that Scotland was the first country in the UK to declare a climate emergency. We've got world-leading targets with the world's most ambitious emission reduction targets. And we've halved our greenhouse gas emissions since 1990, and we're second only to Sweden in Western Europe in meeting those targets. We've stopped fracking in Scotland, and we're reviewing the role that incinerators play in Scotland's waste hierarchy, all of which will benefit our environment in the long term. I agree with James, COP26 is going to be a really exciting time for Glasgow and for Scotland, and to look at how we can push further our ambitions to have a much more environmentally friendly country.
Thanks very much, Claire. And Graham?
Yeah, Thanks a lot, John. I mean, it's a really important area, this, because, as you said, transport is a big contributor to carbon emissions. So quite obviously, if that's the case, we need to decarbonise the transport network. So we need to be looking at trains, buses, but also cars. So if we look at cars, we want to get more people driving electric cars. Now, that's really difficult at the moment for two reasons. One, they're very, very expensive, horrendously expensive, actually, to buy a new electric car. And two, the network of charging points isn't what it should be just yet. So that needs to be rolled out. And in parts of the country, you know, like yours, John, where there are a lot of flats, I think we need to be providing electric vehicle charging points in flats, probably in the street, or if not, in communal car parks. So that we need to grasp that nettle, and then I think the price of electric vehicles will come down, because it's only when that happens will more people start to use them. And then we look at public transport, and James was absolutely right in your patch, in East Kilbride as well. The bus network isn't what it should be. So I think we have the potential, under provisions in the Transport Act, for councils to band together. These are provisions which have actually not been enacted yet, but councils can band together to look at the way we run bus services. And Sheila made a point which I agree with, and we've included in our manifesto, that we should empower regional transport partnerships to look at not just buses, but train services as well, because you need to look at the whole suite of how people get about. And I would also make it a lot easier by having a smart travel card that you could use on buses and trains, to make, you know, so it'd be a seamless. And if I can look at active travel, because that's a particular passion of mine, I know it is of yours as well, John. We're both cyclists, but what puts people off cycling is bad infrastructure. It feels unsafe for a lot of people. Now, you know, it's okay for you and I, who are quite experienced cyclists. We're quite confident on the road, but a lot of people aren't. So I think we need more segregated cycle routes, better condition, and that comes down to investment. We've suggested that by the end of the next Parliament, we should be spending 10% of the total transport budget on active travel. And it's only by doing that you'll get more people cycling, and actually building on the progress that we've had during the pandemic, where we've seen many more people cycling and walking, which is a great thing, good thing for health and good thing for the climate.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. Claire, do you want to come back in, and then Sheila?
Thanks, John. Actually, one of the policies there that Graham spoke about increasing the active travel budget to 10% of the transport capital budget on walking, cycling and wheeling is in the SNP manifesto. So I think in the next Parliament, these are areas that cross-party we can look at and work on. And the 20-minute neighbourhoods that I mentioned earlier on will help to promote that active travel, so that people don't need to get into their car to access services, don't need to get into their car to access shops. Encouraging more living within town centres will also help with that. So I think these are things that we can all work on. The environment is an issue that doesn't not affect any of us. So I look forward to some interesting and fruitful cross-party talks in the next Parliament.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. Sheila, and then James.
Yeah, I think when we're looking at this, it goes wider than just the transport. It's why do people sometimes have to travel? Now, Claire mentioned there are 20-minute communities. That's good, but every service that somebody needs can't be always within 20 minutes of us. But there are services there that we rely on now that are getting pulled further away. So if you're a woman who has a need to go to the breast clinic and have a mammogram, and I don't mean the standard check every few years, but you've got a health issue and you need to get that. Women in Rutherglen have been so grateful to have been able to go to the Vicky, and it's local and there's a bus service to it. And now we're not getting it. Now we have to travel to Gartnavel. You know, and yes, you do. I've physically done it myself. It's the scanner is not there.
Sorry, you don't. It's the West of Scotland Breast Screening Clinic is in Nelson Mandela Place.
No. I don't mean the screening clinic. I'm saying if you've got a health condition, I don't mean the general one. If you've got a breast clinic, if you find a lump in your breast and you go to your GP, up until recently, you would have gone to the Vicky to see about it. You would have seen the breast nurse there. There would have been a consultant there. You'd have had the mammogram there. You'd have had the whole service on the day. A woman would go in at the beginning and come out with results of what's happening there.
I'm sorry, Sheila, you're wrong. I went through the very same thing a few weeks ago, and it's in Nelson Mandela Place.
Well, I can tell you that I went to Gartnavel, and I know of other people, and there used to be the service at the Victoria, and that scanner is not there now.
Okay. Thanks. That clearly different perspectives on that. James, what did you want to come in for?
I think the point I would want to make is the role of some of these big companies who are not serving communities well. I know it's been mentioned that the transport bill has been passed, and that seeks to try and give better options for communities. But I think that's got to be kept under tight review. It's quite clear that First Bus in areas have let down local constituents and local communities, as have Abellio. So I think we need to have a close eye on these business interests, make sure they serve local communities, and also make sure their plans are consistent with achieving climate change targets.
Okay, thanks very much, James. As with the economic recovery, I think there's a fair degree of cross-party consensus on issues of public transport, investing in rail, active travel, bus services, and so on. One of the issues that's come up under each of the topics that we've discussed are public services, and of course, we know that there are these huge pressures on the NHS, on social care, on education. There's a huge backlog of medical treatment. One of our listeners, Peter Phillips, was saying that in the area of mental health, he highlighted that 1,500 people, according to his figures, are having to wait over a year to see a specialist. And there are also the increasing cost of caring for the elderly and infirm. And of course, as a number of you have said, there's the big challenge of ensuring that young people can catch up on lost education. So there are these pressures on our very key public services. Let's talk a bit about what your plans are for these public services, some of which you've touched on before. But Graham, would you like to lead off?
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty wide-ranging, but you've started off on mental health. Mental health has been a problem before the pandemic. We've been talking about this for a long time. Sheila's party leader, Willie Rennie, never stops talking about mental health, and he's quite right, because it's, we have been falling behind. There's been a backlog, particularly for young people, for far too long. So it's not just the pandemic, but the pandemic has made it worse, inevitably. And I think there is probably a dam that's about to burst. And that's really, really concerning, because during the pandemic, people just won't have been getting seen. They won't have been. So problems have been stored up. Ultimately, it requires investment. And we do need to invest in mental health, but we need to. I mean, waiting lists have been an issue again for a long time. The SNP have not hit their targets on waiting lists, and that's pre-pandemic. So we're going to have an awful lot catching up to do. We're going to have to continue investing record sums in the health service, but also in education. I don't want to take too long on this, John, because it was a wide-ranging question, covers the whole of the public sector. But I think, frankly, well, both those areas need investment, health and education, but they're both equally important.
Okay, thanks very much, Graham. Claire, do you want to come in now?
Thanks very much. That was a hugely wide-ranging question there, John. But if I can pick up on the NHS and talk about health, because obviously that's an area that I'm very passionate about, having worked for 30 years as a mental health nurse before I came into Parliament, and serving as Minister for Mental Health. And over the last year, there have been absolutely tremendous pressures on our NHS staff. And I want to thank them again, as I do regularly, for the work that them and social care staff have done throughout the pandemic and before. And as an early recognition of that work, we provided a £500 thank you to our NHS and social care staff, and a commitment on fair pay. And I think that's only fair and reasonable. And I think we are the only part of the UK that has provided that additional monies to our NHS and social care staff. We're funding the recovery through an NHS recovery plan backed by a 20% increase in investment in frontline services, and that will deliver an above inflation rise in NHS spending of at least £2.5 billion over the course of the next Parliament. Community services, which are vitally important, will receive at least half of our NHS frontline spending, and we're looking at investing £10 billion to replace and refurbish health facilities across Scotland, and that includes developing further elective centres which will look at providing services for the hips, eyes, knees, those sort of operations that people are waiting for, and that includes one in NHS Lanarkshire, a facility that's going to be built in Cumbernauld. We're going to fast-track cancer diagnostic centres, have fast-track diagnostic centres in every health board. And as more care is delivered in the community than was previously, we're going to provide an increase of at least 25% in primary care funding. Now, all of that is backed up by an increase in the doctors that we have in training, an increase in our nurses that we have in training, and in providing paramedics with bursaries for the first time to ensure that they can complete their training without financial penalty. I need to take issue with something that Sheila said earlier about there hasn't been an increase in training of mental health staff, and there absolutely has. We've increased our mental health nurses in training, we've increased our psychologists in training, and we've increased the psychiatrists in training, and we appreciate that we need all of those. Touching on young people, yes, we have absolutely accepted that waits for mental health services for young people were and are too long, and we are working very closely with health boards to ensure that we recover those services quickly. It's important to know that mental health services have remained open throughout the pandemic and have been providing care and treatment, but for obvious reasons they had to work in a very different way, and often had to prioritise urgent and emergency referrals. But as the investment of £120 million prior to Parliament going into recess will help us to recover those backlogs and to work closely with health boards and ensure that we do have the appropriate care and treatment for children, and in a timely way. And I think it's also important to very briefly talk about some of the additional services that have been provided for our children and young people, because not everyone needs to go to CAM services. So we have put school counsellors in high school, so every high school has access to a school counsellor. We're increasing school nurses to 250 school nurses by 2022, so an additional 250 school nurses, and their focus will be on well-being to help support our children and young people in high school. We're training our teachers in mental health first aid, and we've made a commitment that we will provide mental health first aid training to everyone in the public service over the course of the next Parliament. So that's just a very brief, I could talk forever about this subject, but that's just very briefly some of the things that we have done and some of the things that we will do if the SNP return to government.
Okay, thanks very much. James, Graham and Claire focused on the NHS, and perhaps you could continue on that. We'll come back to the education issue in a moment. What are your plans? What are Scottish Labour's plans for the NHS?
In terms of the NHS, there's no doubt that there is a big backlog. Before we got to the pandemic in 2019, there were 6,800 cancelled operations. The SNP breached their waiting time targets, which was a legal target. So there are massive challenges there. I think the key areas that need to be addressed are in cancer. Clearly, there can be issues with people who have, because of the pandemic, have not been able to, attend appointments that they might otherwise have been due to go to, and I think sadly that will mean there's a backlog of cancer treatments in the system. So there needs to be a fast track in terms of screening and treatment. I think the mental health issue is a big one. Again, a lot of people have struggled through the pandemic. When you speak to people, they say this has been really tough. And I think there's a kind of time bomb on mental health issues, and that there needs to be a programme to address that. One of the things Scottish Labour are proposing is a dedicated mental health worker in each GP practice. And I think that could then help when there are mental health issues, that there's somebody who specialises in that area that does have to deal with. And the third thing I would say is fair treatment of the workers, fair pay for the staff, and particularly for those in the care sector. I think those who have worked in care homes have done so in really challenging circumstances, and in some cases are not paid adequately. So Scottish Labour would propose an immediate move to £12 an hour, with an ambition of moving that to £15 an hour in the longer term. So those are our highlights, if you like. There's a lot to deal with there, but those are the kind of main areas that I think need to be addressed.
Okay, thanks very much, James. And Sheila?
Yeah, if we're sticking on the education side,
can we stick on the NHS?
Sorry, in the NHS side, Claire, sorry if I maybe overstretched the point I was making on the mental health, but certainly when we look at, there's the same number of CAM psychiatrists in training now as there were 5 years ago. And we know that young people are going to need more of that, and we need to get that increased. We need to make sure that there's mental health first aiders in workplaces. And I think we need to, as well as looking after the public sector, we often forget, and we often in Hustings don't have a question on the other sector, the third sector, that supports the public sector as well as the people. Because a lot of the public sector and the health services now rely heavily on the charities that are working alongside them to support them, particularly in mental health, to try and get to the point that people don't need that level of professionally qualified medical mental health person by getting that community support. And I think that's important when we look at our public sector and what we're doing around community, and we use the old term of community education, but that community support, it doesn't always have to be in the form of somebody that's got a NHS qualification or job. It can be people in the community that are there supporting and working with people behind them. People that know them within their own community can often help someone. And helping people of all ages work towards goals that will help them to improve their life can help them to improve their mental health. So I think when we're speaking about public sector and health, we need to also think about the charitable sector, the third sector, and how we support the two and how they integrate and work together. I think we need to look at our care homes. We've definitely got a growing older population, so we need to make sure that we've got national standards to support better care within the services there. We need to have a career structure that rewards care workers. If we think back, both in hospitals and in community settings, to what used to be called the auxiliary nurse job, where people were still seen as a nurse because they still had that role without the qualification, but they were still physically doing what people would think of as nursing. And now we have the care workers. We need to make sure that they're treated with respect, and that they've got the right training, because there's so many care workers out there that have got specialist training, working in specialist areas, and they get all labelled with the same title. So we need to make sure that there's a proper structure for them and a career structure and a way of showing the public the level of service that people are getting by knowing what the jobs that people are doing for them, and not just, oh, that carer. Because a lot of that carers are doing things that no one else will do for the people in need within our communities. And we need to make sure that they're being paid properly as well for their jobs that they're doing.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. We're running a little close to the deadline, but Tam has said we can go over by a few minutes. So I don't want to miss out on the important area of education, but looking across the manifestos, a bit like some of the other areas, you can see a remarkable consensus, it seems to me, on the importance of the attainment gap, the importance of bounce back, catch up measures. Are there specific points, just briefly, that each of you would like to highlight? Graham first.
Yeah, I realise we're up against the clock here, so I'll just mention one idea if I can, and that's we would like to see a dedicated STEM teacher in every primary school. And in case you don't know what STEM is, that is science, technology, engineering, and maths. So you know, and these I think are key areas. I think I would also like, well, we would also like to see a focus on modern languages. So we would want to see kids being offered 2 foreign languages, probably in high school, but also expand the range of subjects in high school, so that, you know, everyone will be able to take at least 7 subjects in S4. And we've seen the range of subjects being offered under the SNP being squeezed, and that's not a good thing. I could go on for a long time, but I won't.
Okay, thanks for keeping it brief, Graham. Claire?
We don't want the ability to pay to interfere with the ability to learn, and we know that hungry children do not learn, and that's why introducing free school breakfasts and lunches for all primary school pupils is a game changer in my way of thinking. Providing tablets and laptops to all school children and access to the internet so that they can continue to learn at home and not be disadvantaged because of the circumstances that they find themselves in. And I think those are 2 absolutely key policies that the SNP would bring forward if they become the next government. And I think those will make a huge difference in terms of challenging childhood poverty, but also in helping children to learn and tackling that attainment gap.
Okay. Thank you very much, Claire. James, what would you highlight as the key point or points from Scottish Labour's plan?
Well, local kids have been let down by the SNP in not bridging the attainment gap. So if you stay in Burnhill or Blair Beth, you don't have the same chance as kids in more affluent areas. So there needs to be action to address that. I think the immediate thing will be emerging from the pandemic and returning to the education system. So Scottish Labour have committed to a personal comeback plan for each pupil. Also a reset guarantee if anyone has not reached the grades that they had aspired to, and also embedding the idea of work experience in pupils' personal education plans. So I think that will help them enhance their chances of trying to find a job in the workplace. And the final thing I would say is that I think the schools should open up their sporting facilities over the summer in order to allow people to get out and participate in sport. That help their physical and mental well-being.
Okay. Thanks, James. And Sheila?
Yeah, I think we need to make sure for children to get the best education, we need to make sure they've got good teachers there, and we need to let the teachers lead in the way that they teach the basics, getting the numeracy and literacy skills right, is so important to every child, without which the door is shut for them all to all learning, especially to the competences of the STEM subjects, which Graham's already explained which they are. And we need to put the teachers at the heart of the SQA and Education Scotland, because we've seen such a letdown from these organisations during the pandemic, and we need to make sure that teaching staff are there at the heart of the work that's done to improve the education for our children.
Great. Thanks very much, Sheila. One final question is on the local on the local area of CamGlen and Rutherglen. Obviously, our constituency has great strengths, but we know that it's got big problems as well. In terms of employers closing down, deprivation that's continuing. One of our listeners, Martin McKee, he talked about the decimation of the green belt by developers, dangerous traffic issues, and lack of investment in our main streets. Another listener, Kim Jackson, she posed the question, if you had £1 trillion to spend in the constituency, what would be your priorities? Now, you may not have £1 trillion, but it's a serious question. If you're elected, what is your top priority for the Rutherglen constituency during your period of office? James, what would yours be?
You mentioned house building. I think there's been a massive growth in house building throughout the constituency. But what local people haven't seen is the equivalent, community benefit from that. So if you take Drumsagard and Newton as an example, the local facilities there don't in any way match what people are paying in council tax revenue. So my priority would be to ensure that the council tax revenues that people are getting, what part of it is invested back locally, and specifically in Newton and Drumsagard. That should mean a new high school for the area, rather than families in that area having to send their kids to Uddingston Grammar.
Great. Thanks, James. And Sheila, what would be your priority?
I think our priority is to get out of the situation we are with COVID for the whole area. I think everyone wants to make sure that we move forward. We would all like to see more shops. That comes with an economic improvement. I think we want to see safety in the constituency. We want to feel safe when we're walking the streets. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of incidents in Rutherglen this week that have made all the social media people speaking about that. So we need to make sure that we've got safe policing, and we haven't spoken about policing at all tonight. So making sure that people feel safe in the community would be one of my number one things. And it comes across in a whole lot of different actions that would need to be done. But I think people of all ages want to feel safe in the community, and that would be my priority.
Thanks a lot, Sheila. And Claire, what would be your priority?
So in maintaining, supporting and attracting business to the area, I think is absolutely key to keep jobs in the local area and support the local industry that we do have in the area. Promoting our town centres and ensuring the regeneration of them. There's some amazing plans for CamGlen. Main Street, we've seen some huge redevelopment in Blantyre, but there's still a way to go in those, and continuing to support local businesses there and promote town centres as a place to live, work and play is really important. I agree about the high school. I have campaigned for a new high school in the halfway area of CamGlen since before I became an MSP, and it's a legacy of previous South Lanarkshire Labour councils who channelled the money to Uddingston Grammar to prop that up, rather than building the facilities that the people needed there when they approved local development plans for that area. So those would be my priorities for ensuring that Rutherglen, CamGlen, Halfway and Blantyre thrive in the next 5 years.
Thanks very much, Claire. Graham, you're not going to be the constituency MSP, but what would you see as a priority for a constituency like ours?
Yeah, I agree with the point on high school. I agree with James on housing, but I've got my own pet project, and it's close to your heart, John. If I had, it wouldn't take £1 trillion, wouldn't take anything like that. But if I had probably £1 million, maybe not even that, I would be investing it in Clyde Cycle Park, because I'd like to get that up and running. And Claire is putting her thumbs up. So maybe, Claire, you and I can work together on that, because I was involved in that project right at the start. I think that could be a game-changing project for young and old in your constituency, and it would help people where I live as well, because people from East Kilbride would use that facility, gets people active of all ages, gets them down next to the Clyde to see what a great asset that is for our area. So that's where I would be putting our money.
Absolutely agree, Graham. And I think, again, it's a fantastic opportunity to bring day trippers, tourists into the local area who will then use the facilities here and spend money in local businesses. So I'm right behind you on that one.
Good. Well, you and I can attend the opening.
Good. Okay. That's a really nice positive note on which to finish. And I think collectively, you've identified a great program, I think, for our constituency going forward. This has been a really interesting debate, and of course we could have kept going for much longer, but as I said, time has beaten us, and we do need to bring things to a close. Before we finish, though, I'd like to give each of you the opportunity, this time in reverse alphabetical order, to make a final statement with a maximum of 1 minute. Sheila, would you like to start with your closing statement?
If you were to vote for me, Sheila Thompson, as your Liberal Democrat MSP for the Rutherglen constituency, then you will get someone that will be committed to moving the constituency and Scotland forward post-COVID. And if you vote for the Liberal Democrats with your second vote, you will also be working towards a positive Scotland, putting recovery first.
Thanks very much, Sheila. Graham, what would your closing statement be?
Yeah, well, I would just like to thank you for organising this event. I think any one of your candidates would make a good MSP, frankly. I think you've seen that. But the choice before people is, what kind of Scotland do we want? Do we want a Scotland where we focus on recovery, or do we want a Scotland where we're always fighting with each other? And I think I would pick the first. So that's why I would urge you to vote both votes Scottish Conservative.
Thank you, Graham. James?
Thanks, John, for your very excellent chairmanship of the event, and also to CamGlen for organising it. This is a massive election where the outcome matters, and I passionately believe that people want the Parliament to come together. We want to focus on recovery, not a referendum. What local people want is a programme for the next Parliament that will deliver jobs and job security, prioritise the NHS, not leave people languishing on waiting lists, to ensure that an education system gives young people the best chance. These are the priorities that I will stand for and campaign for. If you want an MSP that will stand up for the area and fight for local issues, not only in the constituency but in the Scottish Parliament, please give me your vote on May the 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And Claire?
Thanks very much, John, and thank you to everyone who's participated in this, and to CamGlen Radio for organising. A vote for me, Claire Hawkey, your SNP candidate, will ensure the voices of the people of Rutherglen, Cambuslang, Halfway and Blantyre will continue to be heard at the Scottish Parliament. These are serious times which require serious government and experienced leadership. And by re-electing Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP, you can ensure Scotland gets that vital experience and the serious programme of government that people need and deserve. So help us to keep Scotland safe and re-elect Nicola Sturgeon and Claire Hawkey on May the 5th by giving both votes to the SNP.
Thank you, Claire. And thank you very much sincerely to all four of you, Claire Hawkey, James Kelly, Graham Simpson and Sheila Thompson. It's been a very interesting debate. It's been good-natured, it's been courteous, and it's been really informative, I think. And I hope that those of listeners of CamGlen Radio listening at home have found it informative, it's interesting, that it's helped you to make an informed choice on May the 6th. Just a reminder that you have 2 votes on May the 6th. The first is the constituency vote, so which is on a purple or lilac ballot paper, where you'll have a choice between 4 candidates represented by the parties that we've heard from this evening. The second vote is for the regional list, and this is a peach-coloured ballot paper, and you'll have a choice between 22 parties. I think, was it 60 centimetres you said it was, Graham? Yes, 22 parties, not just the 4 represented this evening, but a longer set of options that you can find a link to on the CamGlen website.
It's the longest ballot paper in Scotland, John.
Okay, good. Well, that's something for us to be famed for. But seriously, whoever you support, please do go out and vote. If you applied for a postal vote, please remember to post it. The postal vote application date has passed, but it still may be possible to arrange a vote by proxy. In closing, I'd like to thank CamGlen Radio for taking the initiative to organise these hustings, and especially to Tam Curry of CamGlen, who's you haven't seen but has been working very much in the background for managing the IT. An audio recording of the hustings will be broadcast on CamGlen Radio on Wednesday, the 5th of May at 7 p.m. Thank you again to our candidates, and thank you again for listening.